This guy, Flash Thompson, he probably deserved what happened. But just because you can beat him up doesn't give you the right to. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
You've heard this line so many times that it may have stopped meaning anything to you. It's been on t-shirts, tattooed on forearms, and quoted at graduation speeches. It's become so embedded in popular culture that people sometimes forget it's not a Shakespeare quote or a biblical proverb. It is a caption box from a 1962 comic about a nerdy teenager from Queens who got bitten by a radioactive spider. But here's the thing, the fact that it has become that perverse is not by accident. It is not marketing, and it's because that sentence is doing something genuinely profound. And Spider-Man, the character built around it, is doing something that almost no superhero in Marvel Comics is doing. See, the thing about Spider-Man is he is not a power fantasy. He is a product of responsibility. Those two things are very different, and today we're going to unpack what that actually means. We're going to look at who Peter Parker is, where he came from, why Stan Lee and Steve Ditko designed him the way that they did, and why the burden he carries is not a flaw in character, it's the entire point of the character. Because Spider-Man is Marvel's Everyman. He is a hero who was built not to inspire awe, but to inspire recognition. And recognition, it turns out, is far more powerful. To understand why Spider-Man matters, you need to understand what comic books looked like before him. In 1962, the dominant superhero template was largely shaped by DC. Superman was a god who chose to live among men. Batman was a billionaire with infinite resources and an iron will. Green Lantern was a test pilot chosen by a cosmic ring for his abilities to overcome fear. These were exceptional people, not just in their powers, but their fundamental nature. They were aspirational in the most classical sense. They were meant to be looked up to, not related to. Marvel had already started to disrupt this model. The Fantastic Four launched in 1961, and what made them interesting was the fact that they bickered with one another. The Hulk, launched in 1962, made him compelling by giving him a power that was also a curse. But even those characters have a mythical grandeur to them. Reed Richards was a genius, Bruce Banner was a genius, Tony Stark was a genius, and Thor was literally a god. But Stan Lee wanted to do something different. He wanted a hero who was not exceptional before he got powers. He wanted a hero who had real-world problems that his superpowers could not solve. A teenager, not a sidekick, not a ward of any adult superhero, but the protagonist of his own story. And a teenager who dealt with all the mundane, grinding, unglamorous misery that being a teenager involves. The result of this was Peter Parker, and editors at Marvel initially hated the idea. The conventional wisdom at the time was that teenagers in comics were sidekicks. Nobody wanted to read about a teenager as a lead, and nobody wanted to relate to a hero who was also a loser. So what did Stan Lee do? Stan Lee famously had to slip Amazing Fantasy number 15 past his publisher because he knew it would get rejected, and the readers related to it immediately, and the book was a sensation. And the rest was history. Let's be specific about what makes Peter Parker the Everyman, because it's not just the fact that he has problems, it's the specific texture of his problems, and the way those problems are constructed to be in consistent and resolvable tension with his responsibilities as Spider-Man. Peter Parker is at his core a person who is perpetually caught between what he owes to himself and what he owes to the world around him. He is brilliant, but that intelligence has never translated into social ease or material comfort. He is an outsider at school, he's dismissed by the people around him, he lives in a working class household with his Aunt May, who loves and who depends on him, and the financial pressures of that household is a consistent pressure in his life. He's not wealthy, he's not connected, he doesn't have a butler or billionaire mentor or secret government sponsor. In fact, he builds his own web shooters out of the parts he can barely afford, and in early comics, he is literally training to sell photographs of himself to a newspaper editor who can't stand him. Every material advantage that other superheroes have as a baseline, Peter is crawling for. And then on top of that, on top of the grades, the job, the bills, the social anxiety, the grief, he has to put on a mask, go fight people who want to kill him, and with no backup, no salary, no guarantee that anyone will ever know he did it. That tension is not just a narrative device to generate drama, it's a philosophical argument the character is making about what responsibility actually costs. The death of Uncle Ben is one of the most analyzed moments in the superhero comics, and for good reason, because it's the moment the character's entire moral framework is forged in the most painful way imaginable. Peter Parker, shortly after getting his powers, makes a selfish choice. He lets a burglar run past him because it's not his problem. He has powers, but he doesn't yet internalize any obligation attached to those powers. He's thinking about himself, about fame, money, and then the same burglar who he let run past him kills his Uncle Ben. The lesson is shattering, and it is specific. The failure was not ignorance. Peter knew he could stop that man. What makes this origin so different from other superhero origins is that Peter Parker's tragedy is not something that happened to him, it's something that he participated in. That lesson is not the world is cruel and random. The lesson is your inaction has consequences for people other than yourself. That is a genuinely difficult moral argument to make to a reader, and it is especially difficult to make to a teenage reader because it is an argument that does not let you off the hook. It says you have capability, and the capability creates obligation. You cannot use the fact that a problem is hard or inconvenient or technically yours to solve. It is, as a point, a reason to walk away. It says you have capability, and the capability creates obligation. You cannot use the fact that a problem is hard or inconvenient or not technically yours to solve as a reason to walk away from it. That is the weight Peter Parker carries in every single story he has ever been in. Here's where we need to talk critically about something, because there is a version of this analysis that treats Spider-Man's suffering as a simple storytelling flaw, as though the writers just keep piling tragedy on him for shock value. That reading is wrong. The suffering is the argument. It is designed, it is intentional, and if you remove it, the character stops working as a moral construct. The reason Peter Parker has to keep losing things, jobs, relationships, time, money, sleep, sometimes people he loves, it's because the story needs to continually tell or test the thesis. The thesis is that responsibility is worth carrying even when it costs you everything. If Peter Parker only sacrificed small things, the thesis could be weak. If the question is it worth skipping a date to go stop a mugger, that is not a meaningful question. Of course it is. The question that Spider-Man is actually asking over and over again across 60 years of story publications is something much harder. Is it worth destroying your own life in service of principle? And the answer the character gives every time is yes, because you can interrogate whether that answer is healthy. Plenty of writers have. Some of the most compelling Spider-Man runs, including J. Michael Straczynski's work in the early 2000s, and even One More Day, in its own controversial way, exists precisely to ask whether Peter's selfishness has crossed the line into something self-destructive. Even though stories only work because the baseline sacrifice is real and costly. The burden is not a punishment, it is proof of character. There's a tendency in certain corners of superhero fandom to treat relatability as a lesser quality in a hero. The argument goes something like, we go to superhero comics for power fantasy, for larger-than-life figures, for gods walking among us. A character who is relatable is by definition scaled down or diminished. A character we recognize in ourselves cannot also be a character who inspires all. Spider-Man is the most thoroughly possible rebuttal to that argument. Peter Parker is extremely powerful. He can lift approximately 10 tons. He has a sixth sense that is an early warning system. He is a genius level intellect who holds his own conversations with Reed Richards and Tony Stark, and by any objective measure, he is one of the most capable beings on planet Earth. And yet, he's still late to work. He still lies to his aunt about where he's going at night. He's still broke. He's still overwhelmed. He's still trying to hold things together while the rest of his life is consistently falling. What Spider-Man proves is that the relatability and exceptionalism are not opposites. They are a combination that, when done correctly, produce something more emotionally resonant than either elements could produce alone. We recognize Peter Parker. We see ourselves in his anxieties, his failures, his guilt, his exhaustion. And then we watch him do extraordinary things anyway, not in spite of his struggles, through them. That is not a diminished power fantasy. That is a more sophisticated and emotionally honest one. Peter Parker's responsibility is not ideological. It's not technical or mythological like Iron Man or Thor. It's immediate and human and specific. It is a responsibility of someone who cannot afford to fail, cannot afford to quit, and cannot afford to let himself become the kind of person who uses his own suffering as a reason to not show up. We see Peter Parker struggle to pay his rent. He is surrounded by larger than life figures and he holds his own among them, not because he has to match their resources or their powers, but because his moral commitment is completely unambiguous. Peter Parker doesn't have to do this because it's glamorous. He does it because he knows what happens when he doesn't. That is the everyman quality at its purest form. It takes that moral clarity and becomes something that is ordinary rather than cosmic. Why does this matter outside of the comic books? Because Spider-Man's everyman status has translated into something genuinely unusual in modern pop culture. He is consistently, across decades, one of the most beloved and commercially successful superheroes in the world. He achieves that through power escalation and not through increasingly elaborate mythology, but through emotional consistency. Every adaptation has worked. The Raimi films, the spectacular animated series, the Into the Spider-Verse franchise, the Holland MCU run, works because it understands the emotional core. This is a good person who pays a very high price for being a good person. Into the Spider-Verse in particular is worth singling out because it makes the everyman thesis explicit in a way that the comics rarely do. The film argues that the Spider-Man identity is not about Peter Parker specifically, it's about the quality of the character can exist in anyone. Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, Penny Parker. None of them are Peter Parker, but they all are Spider-Man because they all share the same moral structure. Ordinary people who chose extraordinary responsibility. The message of the film is the message that has always been embedded in the character, just made audible and visual for everyday people to see, non-comic book fans to be specific. Anyone could wear the mask. That is the everyman promise. That is the moral choice Peter makes to show up, to sacrifice, to carry the weight. It is a choice that you are available to everyone. You don't need to be a god, you don't need to be a billionaire or a super soldier. You just have to decide that your power, whatever form it takes, comes with an obligation to use it well.
With great power comes great responsibility.
That responsibility is not a power fantasy, that is a philosophy. And Peter Parker, broke, exhausted, grieving, perpetually behind on everything, loved, resented, and misunderstood in equal measure, carries that philosophy into every single story he inhabits. He's not the strongest, he's not the richest, or the most resourced hero in the Marvel Universe. He is, by almost every external measure, the one that's the most put upon. But he keeps showing up, and the reason he keeps showing up, the reason we keep watching him show up, is because we understand. And some part of ourselves that's showing up when it costs you something is the most version of heroism, is the only version of heroism that actually means anything. That is why Spider-Man is Marvel's everyman, not because he's ordinary, but because what he does with the extraordinary is something we recognize as a choice we all have in some way, shape, or form, always being asked to make. He is us, not as we are, but as what we are trying to be. And that 60 plus years in publication is still enough to make him one of the most important characters in the history of the medium. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do all the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe. I'm very thankful for you watching the video all the way through. Comment below on your favorite Spider-Man moment. I'm Anderson. Thanks for watching. Bye.